Hi, I'm Adam Porter and this is my top 100 all killer, all filler board games. So we're looking here at games with simple rules, short durations and small packages, right? The sort of games you might not see on somebody else's top 100. And now we're at numbers 50. We're in the second half, 50 down to 41. And at number 50, we've got a game which used to be called Yardmaster in its first edition, but was then released by Yellow with a very different sort of aesthetic, although it's still all about trains. Now it's called Aramini Circus, and much more focused on a childish sort of audience with this lovely circusy artwork. This is a game where we're going to be laying out cards to create trains, so we're laying out train carriages. And each time you put in a carriage, it's either got to match the number of the carriage in front of it or the colour of the carriage in front of it. You're going to be building out this train as you go along, and you score points at the end of the game according to the numbers on your train. In fact, you've got to beat a certain number total in order to end the game. The game's a very simple affair of swapping cards with the deck, taking cards either blind from the top of the deck. You've got some special action cards in there. You've got a token that sits in front of you, which allows you to use two cards of one type in place of one card of another type. There's another action on your turn which allows you to swap these tokens. So if you don't want to use the token that's in front of you, you could swap it with the token in front of another player for an action. Simple sort of open drafting stuff, but I find this one really accessible and intuitive. It's not the most strategic game in the world, but it's really, really fun, whichever version of the game that you get. So that's Aramini Circus. Number 49 is Plapparagei, which is from the Drei Magierspiel Ugly Bug or Ugly Animals range. And this one is a game where it's one of those mind-bending games where you're playing a card from your hand and then you have to say something. And if you get it wrong, you've got to do it quickly, right? You can't hesitate. If you get it wrong, you're going to have to gather up cards, and you don't want cards, okay? You want to get rid of all your cards. So you play a card, and normally what you do is say the colour of the animal on your card. But certain colours are banned in any given round. There's tokens out which say this colour is banned. So if you play a card and the colour of the animal is banned, then you don't say the colour of the animal, you say the colour of the hat that it's wearing. But if that's banned as well, then you don't say either. You don't say the colour of the animal or the colour of the hat that it's wearing. You click your tongue. Okay. But then there's other rules too. If you play an animal and it matches the animal that's on the other pile, then you have to, I think, call out the name of the animal. I'm losing track now. Now you'll be thinking through the game, what am I supposed to be doing in this instance? What if I do this? If you play a parrot, you've got to repeat the thing that the previous player said, okay? But if there's already a parrot on the table, then you don't do that. What you do is you race to say parattle, in which case the first player or the later player to do it ends up taking all the cards. It's totally mind-bending, chaotic, frantic. You'll either love this sort of game or hate them. I find them hilarious. This is great, chaotic, fun stuff. Really tricky, really difficult to get your head round. I love it. I love this style of game. Number 48 is an absolute classic from Asmodee. This is Timeline. So Timeline, there's numerous different sets. For example, you might have a set that's all about inventions, and every card will have an invention on it, and you've got to decide when that invention happened, when it was made, in relation to other inventions that have already been laid out on the table. So you're creating a timeline of these different inventions. So when you play a card, you've got to slot it into the timeline, then you flip your card over and it tells you what year it happened, and you can see were you right or were you wrong, okay? And you're trying to get rid of the cards that you've got in hand. That's it, really. That's the whole game. There are multiple different sets. You know, there's sets about cinema releases and musical releases. There's sets about history and British history. There's sets about just general knowledge events in history. There's sets that are thematic. There's a Star Wars set and so on. You know, it's really been utilised in all sorts of different ways. It's come in different packages. I had a big box package once. I've got Timeline Challenge, which has all sorts of different additional challenges you can do with these sets. But I think often these games just come in tiny little tins. It's great. It's just a really good filler. I found players of all different ages, young players, elderly people. I found this is a really, really popular game. In fact, I had multiple copies of this at my wedding, and people were just playing it on the tables. They were playing it, in the bar. It's just so simple that anyone can get involved. They can watch and join in. It's really, really simple stuff. And that's great for a filler. That's a perfect filler, isn't it? A game that you can just jump in and out of. Nobody really cares who wins, but it's really interesting just because the trivia is interesting. And it surprises you all the time. You turn over and kind of, I can't believe that happened before this. Okay, it's a fascinating game. Really great concept. Highly recommended. Timeline. Number 47 is a flicking game from Matthew Dunstan and Trevor Benjamin. This is from AEG, and it's a tiny little box, back when AEG was making loads of little mini games. And you're flicking here these little wooden discs. You haven't got many of them. You've got a bunch of them of your colour, your opponent's got a bunch of their colour, and then in the middle you've got these torches. Half of them are in your opponent's colour, half in your colour. On your turn, you flick a disc. If it makes contact with a torch, you flip it over to your side. If it makes contact with an opponent's disc, you flip their disc over, and so it now shows your colour and becomes a usable disc for you. And the aim of the game is just to get all the torches in the centre, all 5 of them, to show your colour. That's it. Really simple. You're flicking the discs, they're flipping back and forth as they hit each other. Who owns them? So there's a tug of war going on here, and you're trying to take ownership of those central torches. As you get more into it, you can start to introduce special ability cards, 1 ability or 2 abilities, which are just single-use abilities that you can use at some point in the game to manipulate the game state. Tiny little package. You know, of all the flicking games, this is the most portable, and it's really fun. Totally overlooked, of course. Nobody talks about it. I've never heard anybody really mention it other than talking to Matthew Dunstan himself about it. But it's a great little game. I think this should be picked up by somebody else in a tiny little box from, I don't know, Helvetique or Yellow, or somebody who might make just a slightly more lavish production of it, but give it another shot in this filler market, because it's great. Number 46 is a game that I got free the first time I ever went to Essen back in 2012. Again, game I've never heard anybody else mention apart from me, but I really like it. It's called Baby Boom. Okay, it was given to me free because I bought a couple of other games from this company. I'm not even sure they exist anymore. They were called Ludocom. And Baby Boom was better than either of the games that I bought from them, this freebie. It's a tiny little game with a theme. It's themed sort of around Super Bomberman, I suppose, although that has nothing really to do with the game. Well, no, it does. It does make sense with the gameplay, actually. That's not fair of me, it does. But it's garish, right? It's bright pink, it's got these ugly sort of baby cartoons running about on it, and actually it's an abstract strategy game. That's the interesting thing about it. You've got dice in the game, they're never rolled. What you do is you move the dice up, down, left or right, and each time you do it, you turn them up a notch, or turn them down a notch actually. So it's a countdown, it goes from a 5 to a 4. Next time you move it goes to a 3, to a 2, to a 1, and then eventually it explodes. When it gets to 0, it explodes. When it explodes, it wipes out all the dice in the same column and in the same row. And you're trying to wipe out all your opponent's dice while yours remain on the board and score you points at the end of the round. There's a whole load of other little extra bits that get thrown into it to make it a bit more interesting, a bit like bigger abstract strategy games we've seen recently, like That Time You Killed Me, or Santorini, or something like that. But in this one, you know, simple things that you might see in Super Bomberman. A conveyor belt where when you move onto it, you shift down. A bomb that when you explode, that explodes as well. A pit that you can push another bomb into. All these sort of things. I think it's great, Baby Boom. It's been a filler, a favourite of mine for the last 10 years as a filler. And yet nobody else talks about it, and I think that's a real shame. Number 45 is another tiny little box game from Amigo Spieler. You'll be very familiar with this range by now. This is Hamster Backe, Hamster Cheeks, I think it translates to. This is a game, again, a little bit like Kariba or Absaka that we've talked about previously. In this one, you've got a circular display, and you're placing columns of cards into that display of different numbers. And what you can do on your turn in this one is take a column, take all the cards from a particular column into your hand, and then you place a new card into that space, but also a new card into the next couple of spaces around the circle, so they constantly refresh and refill. So you get more and more attractive offers around the circle, which drives somebody else to take those cards and then generate more cards into that display. So it's a very dynamic selection of cards that goes around there. Another alternative thing you can do on your turn is take a selection of cards from your hand. So you could take, for example, 3 3s or 2 2s, or you could take multiple. You could take 2 sets of 2 2s, and you can put them onto your pile, right? This pile in front of you, face up. And the card that's on the top of your pile, so let's say you have 4 4s on the top of your pile, well, no other player can now play sets of 4 4s until you've put something else on top of that pile or cleared the pile entirely. So it blocks the other players. Another option that you have on your turn as a player is to take that collection of face-up cards in front of you and turn it face down. Now that turns your pile into a scoring pile. They're the cards that are going to score you points at the end of the game. And in doing that, turning it face down, you look at the card that was on the top of the pile before you turned it face down, and the number that's on there, you can take that number of cards from the other player's hands and add them to your own hand of cards. So there's a little bit of stealing cards from the other players and that sort of thing. If you don't like that, then this is probably not the game for you. So you get to steal these cards into your hand, you can build a nice big hand of cards, but at the end of the game, your score is going to be the cards in your scoring pile minus the cards that you still have in hand. Essentially, it's another clever twist on open card drafting on the table. I'm not talking pick and pass drafting here, I'm talking about open drafting on the tabletop. And I think it's great. I've always really enjoyed this one. I've had it for years and years, and I come back to it frequently. Number 44 is a dexterity game in a tiny little package. This is Super Rhino, or Rhino Hero, from Harbour. It's a stacking game where you're on your turn you play a card, and the card that you play, you have to balance it on top of a folded card to start to build a tower. And all players are collectively building this one tower that's getting very wobbly because it's just built out of folded cards, right? But the card that you put on the top, the floor that you place, has a little symbol on it, which, you know, manipulates the game state in some way. It might say that the order of play reverses, so we stop going clockwise, we start going anti-clockwise. Or it might mean the next player misses a turn, or all this sort of, you know, horrible mass market stuff that most of us gamers turn our noses up, you know, at. But it's really fun. The best bit, right, is that you get to play a card and it's got a little image of a rhino on it, the Rhino Hero. Well, at this point, you've got to lift this little wooden token of the Rhino Hero and lift him up and put him onto one of the upper levels where that symbol is, balance him on there, and that makes the whole tower sway, right? But you don't want to knock that tower over. If you knock that tower over, you lose, and then the player has the fewest cards in hand wins the game. Very simple stuff, blown up into a bigger game with Rhino Hero Super Battle, which actually I prefer, but that's not a tiny package at all, that's a nice big package. But Rhino Hero itself, it's had a number of spin-off games, you know, a junior version, if you can go any more junior than that, and other games from Harbour which have Rhino Hero as a character, even though they're not about dexterity. So it's obviously done well for Harbour, and it's great for kids, but actually it's really funny for adults to play as well. I love Rhino Hero, I think it's great, well worth looking up. Number 43 is a game that disappeared for many years, but I've heard it's coming back. I've heard it's going to be reprinted at some point over the next year or two. So this is Haggis, which is another climbing game. Now, I've mentioned a lot of climbing games. I'm becoming a bit of a broken record here, aren't I? This one is distinctive in that it's great at 2 players. It's really good at 2 players. And it plays with 3. You can play with 2 or 3. But that's unusual for a climbing game to be brilliant at 2 players. It's a bit more sort of traditional in its presentation. Almost looks like a standard deck of playing cards. You know, we've got numbered cards, we've got kings, queens, jacks in there. But they do have little point scoring symbols on them, so they're worth different numbers of points. And the distribution of the cards is slightly different. And it's a slightly more intricate game, almost like something like Tichu or something like that. Let's start from the beginning. You're playing pairs of cards, and then the other player or players have to play a higher pair, or you play 3 of a kind, the other player has to play bigger 3 of a kind, or you play a run of cards, other player has to play a bigger run. Or you can play a couple of pairs. You could play a pair of 7s, a pair of 8s, the other player has to play, you know, a pair of 9s, a pair of 10s. So you can do that sort of thing as well. And there's these bombs. Now, bombs is where you've got a specific combination of cards that's dictated in the rules. You know, you've got cards, or the rule book tells you what these bombs are. So a specific combination of cards that you can play, and they will trump anything. They will beat anything. And when you beat something, you know, when you play and nobody else can play after you, everyone else has to pass, you take the cards and place them into your central display. And they're there for scoring, right? They're your scoring pile at this point. At the start of each round, you also get to place bets, right? Whether you're going to be the first out and that sort of thing. And that gives you a big point boost as well. And it's essentially you play until you reach a certain points total. I mean, that's it. It's very similar to the sort of games that you might play with a traditional deck of cards, but it's got really nice artwork. It's a nice set of cards, and the rules are great. It just feels deeper than some of the other climbing games that I've talked about previously, and it's great with 2 players. There used to be a brilliant app. I don't think the app exists anymore. Maybe that will come back, because that was really good as well. I've had a lot of fun with Haggis, although I haven't played it for a while, and I'd highly recommend it when the reprint comes out. Number 42, couldn't be much more different. This is Crossing. Crossing is a game with simultaneous selection, really. It's really nice production. You've got a little tile in front of you, and then you've got a few mushrooms in between the players. And at the beginning of each round, you place out coloured tokens drawn out of a bag, and you place them onto the different tiles at the centre of the table. And then you count to 3, and everybody points at one of the mushrooms. And you want to be the only person pointing at a specific mushroom, because then you get to take all the tokens on top of it. If multiple people point at that mushroom, nobody gets anything, right? Once people have started to gather up these tokens and they've got them on their own personal tile, their character tile, then new options open up, because now you can't just point at a mushroom. You could instead, if you want to, point at another player's personal tile. And if you point at that tile and you're the only person pointing at that tile, you get to steal all their tokens off them. But another option's available, which is to cover your tile. So when we get to 3, instead of pointing at something, you cover your own tile, which protects the tokens on your tile and prevents anybody from taking them. But it means that you can't then play in the next round. And that's it. That's how the game goes on. It's mind games, it's bluffing, it's double bluffing, it's trying to work out who's going to do what, who's going to go for what. You're trying to build up sets of different colours so you can see what sort of tokens the other players need, because you get more points if you've got them in neat little sets than you do if you just have random colours in front of you. It's a lovely production, very, very simple rule set, chaotic and fun, lively sort of party game. I think it's great. Number 41 is a real classic in this sort of genre of filler games. A bit of an older game now. This is Coloretto, which I think has been quite an influential game in this sort of genre. So in Coloretto, you're trying to collect up groups of cards, basically, of matching colours. I think there's 7 suits in the game. That might vary from version to version. I think there's 7 in my set. And at the end of the game, you're going to score for sets, but you can only score for 3 colours, positive points. Every other colour that you've gathered is worth negative points. So you're very specific about what you want to take. And on your turn, you can either turn over a card from the deck and add it to one of the columns that's laid out on the table, or you can take one of the columns in its entirety and add it to your display. And that's it, really. That's the whole game, is trying to build up the sets of the colours that you want, mess up the sets of the other players by, mixing colours into the sets in the central columns that's going to prevent them from taking it because they don't want those colours. So there's a bit of thinking, double thinking, watching the other players, destructive sort of drafting, as well as drafting the cards that you want in front of you. It's really satisfying. It was used in a bigger board game later by the same designer, Michael Schacht. This was Coloretto, which uses the same sort of mechanism in a much bigger tile laying game with a zoo sort of theme. But Coloretto itself takes that mechanism down to its absolute core of, do I add to a display or do I take stuff from the display? Really simple, really effective game, intuitive, simple to teach, an absolute classic. So looking at patterns, designers, publishers, mechanisms, themes in my list, no big surprises with the designers. Rhino is still out in the lead, closely followed by Bruno Catala. For publishers, we've got Amigo with 9, Zoc with 7, and then NSV and Helvetique with 3 apiece. No change on the themes. Abstract is out in the lead, followed by anthropomorphic animals, and then fantasy and farming. And then topping the mechanisms, trick-taking, followed by dice rolling, and then climbing and shedding. So I hope you enjoyed this list. Please let me know in the comments what you think about my picks, and I'll see you next time. All the best.